All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all very much for being here today. It's our opportunity today to share with you the annual Citizen Satisfaction Survey results. I'm here just to say hello, to give you a quick introduction. City Manager Jeff Fielding will speak just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll turn it over to Jamie Duncan from Ipsos Reid, who will go into the detailed results with you. And then we will have time for questions at the end. And then at the end of that, I will take questions on other issues as well. Okay? So, Citizen Satisfaction Survey. This is getting a bit old, I think. It's the fourth time that I've had the opportunity to stand in front of you and say that people are happy. I know at least one columnist in the city hates it when I say people are happy, but people are happy, and that is what the data show. And I should start with a terrible error that I have made. I have to own up to a terrible error. I was just reading the media release, and I realized that as a guy who loves data as much as I do, I use the word data as though it were singular, not plural. And I said the data shows. That is terrible. So what the data show are that perceptions about quality of life in Calgary are very strong. The long-term trend or the medium-term trend on this is really quite remarkable. Since 2010, we've seen a really significant uptick on all of this stuff. So I encourage you to look at the slides that you're going to see since 2010. Now, in some areas, I will tell you there was a bit of a decline this year. I still remember that 2 years ago, Jamie came to see me in 2012 and said, you know, we've got a problem. And the problem is that your numbers are too high. So you have to prepare yourself for what you're going to say when the numbers go down. And of course, in 2013, they were even higher. And this year, on some measures, you'll see that they did go down back to 2012 when they were too high. But that is very much the situation that we are in. Satisfaction with city services is extremely high. There is a dip in overall satisfaction, but when you break it down by services, you'll see that from the vast majority of services, people's satisfaction has increased. So it's kind of an interesting thing. The overall is down a bit. For the individual services, it is up. The issue agenda hasn't changed very much. It doesn't since 2008, 2009, when issues of crime and safety were leading the agenda. Since then, we've seen issues around infrastructure, traffic, roads, transit remaining towards the top of the agenda. 2/3 of people, you know, I always say that 1/3 of people will be grumpy on many things, but 2/3 of people perceive good value for their municipal tax dollar. Only 8% perceive poor value. And we have a new question this year that I think all of you are going to be very, very interested in, because we asked people service by service, should we be spending the same, more, or less on these services? And there's a very, very broad consensus, believe it or not, for more investments across city services, across many, many city services, which you might find surprising. Before I turn it over to Jamie, I wanted to invite Jeff Fielding, our city manager, up to speak about two things. One, his perception, since this is his first time, well, since 2000, in dealing with this information for the city of Calgary. And second, just to give you a tiny sense of why we do this. It's not just to do this press conference once a year. It's actually because this is a data-driven organization, and these data make a big difference to how we make decisions within the organization. So, Jeff.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and welcome you all. The mayor mentioned that this information's a bit old. Well, for me, it's a bit new. I have not had the pleasure of seeing these types of numbers anywhere else I've worked. These are remarkable numbers, and they're not achieved in any other city across this country. So when you're looking at them, I think we take it for granted, but you have to look at it in terms of context, in terms of how Calgary is set apart from the rest of the country. Yeah, I think the other thing that's really important is we're making a shift in our organization. We're moving away from customer service to service value. And that's what we try to poll and try to get some information on that in this survey. What are the services that make the biggest difference in the quality of life? And where do citizens want us to invest in terms of our tax dollars in making those services better? So that you'll see some of that evidence today. We're starting to use this more and more in terms of our business planning and making sure that the impact that we have and the information that we have available to us, we're measuring that. And we're talking about ways in which we can improve the service delivery and turn the curve as we're talking about it. So we think this is critically important. I'd like to do more of it. We've expanded it a little bit this year, and we want to see more expansion in the future, see what citizens have to say. So I'll turn it over to Jamie Duncan from Ipsos Reid, and he'll take us through the survey. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to walk through some highlights from this year's citizen survey, but we're going to start off high level with just a few logistics in terms of what we did. This year's survey window happened between August the 27th and October the 1st, and the sample size this year increased from 1,000 in the previous years to 2,450, leaving us a margin of error of plus or minus 2 percentage points. And the reason for that is we are conducting additional analysis at a ward level that will be released later next week. In terms of the makeup of the sample, we use both landline and cell phone sample as part of the overall mix. And you can see that citizens who participated in the survey, all 2,450 of them, spent on average 29 minutes on the phone talking to our interviewers about their perspectives on the city of Calgary. And finally, an important note in terms of the reliability of data, I get asked this question every year, is this representative of Calgarians as a whole? We use weighting on the back end to weight the data where appropriate based on age, gender, and the population distribution across Calgary. So as Jeff said, the very first metric that we take a look at is around quality of life, because ultimately a municipality is looking at impacting how citizens feel about living in their communities. In Calgary, 87% of Calgarians rate the quality of life in our communities being good or very good. You can see those numbers are on trend from where we were last year and even back to 2012, and have been increasing year over year over the last number of years. When we ask people to consider the change in quality of life, the momentum over the last 3 years, we look at 3 individual metrics, whether or not quality of life has improved, worsened, or stayed the same. When we take a look at the percentage of people who say that quality of life has worsened over the last 3 years, that number is down at 20%, stayed the same as at 49%, and improved is at 31%. Now there's a slight change in the numbers this year versus last year, down from 35% to 31% among the percentage of people who say that quality of life has improved. But to the city manager's point, these numbers are higher than what we see in most municipalities across Canada. And so generally the overall mood in Calgary around quality of life is actually quite strong. We ask a series of questions around attitudes about living in the community. One of them is whether or not citizens believe that the city of Calgary is on the right track to be a better city down the road. And compared to last year, the number is exactly the same, 90%. Virtually 90% of people say that they agree that Calgary is on the right track to be a better city 10 years from now. A slight change, however, in the overall agreement. You can see that top box score in the strongly agrees now at 35% compared to the 41% that we saw in 2013. But despite that drop, we're back to where we were in 2012. And so overall, those numbers are very, very positive. The very first question that we ask in the survey is an open-ended, unprompted question where we ask citizens to tell us, in their view, the issues facing the community that they would like local leaders to address. And this year, the number one issue provided by citizens relates to infrastructure, traffic, and roads. And you can see on the far right-hand side of that slide that is up 10 percentage points from where we were in 2013. And the elements that make up that overall mention, traffic congestion, road conditions, snow removal, infrastructure maintenance, those are the top themes that relate to that one item. And the second piece on that issue agenda is transit. And while it is statistically the same as where we were last year, it is the number 2 issue that Calgarians believe local leaders should address. And you can see the items within there: transportation in general, public transit, and transit system improvements. And then a number of other items relating from education to crime and safety, recreation, environment, waste management, homelessness, all the way down to budget and spending at only 3% of unprompted mentions. So just as a reminder, the way this question works, this is not a list that's provided to citizens. We capture their open-ended responses. We have a team of people who review those responses and come up with those overall themes. So we have been tracking the most important issue back since 2001. And so just to show you, the red bar represents the first mention, or the most important issue that people tell us top of mind. And so when we take a look at that tracking back to 2001, you can see that infrastructure, traffic, and roads has been the number 1 issue in Calgary since we started tracking this, for the most part, with the exception of crime and policing back in 2008. And that really had to do with a moment in time. We happened to survey during a period of time where there were some gang activities, and that was reflected in the numbers that we saw. But despite that, number 1 issue, and not unlike other Canadian municipalities, we typically see transportation and infrastructure as a number 1 issue in many communities across the country. And we did see a significant increase this year in the mentions around transit. So the first mention around transit up from 14% in 2013, now at 18%. And a slight drop, given the margin of error this year, it's quite small, so we have slight drop in the mentions of healthcare, which is not in the purview of the municipal government, but some citizens believe that is something that the City of Calgary does take care of. To the city manager's point, there was some changes this year in perceptions around overall satisfaction with the level and quality of services provided by the City of Calgary. So while down compared to 2013, we still have 8 in 10 citizens who say that they're satisfied with the city's overall performance in this area, and a significant increase year over year, dating back all the way to 2006. You can see that one of the lower numbers, 64% in 2007, trending upwards over that period of time. So we ask in the survey a three-part question that is responsible for the 29 minutes that we spend on average on the phone. We provide citizens with a list of services. We ask them to tell us how important those services are to them personally, how satisfied they are, and then this year we also added into the mix whether or not they believe the city should invest more, the same, or less in each of those services. So what I'm going to show you is not the laundry list of all the services that we tested, but only those where we've seen significant changes against the data from 2013. So this year, as it relates to perceived importance, so the percentage of people who say that this service is important to them and their families, an increase for city-operated recreation programs, up 7 points to 85%. Similar increase in social services for individuals at 5 percentage points to 95% of people saying that that is important to them. 4 points on city-operated recreation facilities to 91, and a 3-point increase on transit up to 94%. Three others. Calgary's pathway system now at 94%, a 3-point change from where we were last year, and 2 drops this year in perceived importance. So not satisfaction, but how important these services are to citizens. Down 3 points for animal services and down 4 points for bylaw services. Now it's important to mention that while those are changes, the story is relatively the same. We still have more than 8 in 10 Calgarians saying that those services are important to them. And I will talk about animal control and bylaw in a second around satisfaction. So while these numbers have gone down, we see an increase in them in a second. So 5 city services that see significant increases in perceived satisfaction this year. The first one, city-operated roads and infrastructure, up 8 percentage points from where we were last year to 81. I'm just going to pause for 1 second. So we have an issue agenda that says a transportation, roads and infrastructure #1 issue. Despite that, more Calgarians this year are saying that they're satisfied with the city's performance in that particular area. City land use planning. For the first time since we've been doing this work, we see a significant 7 percentage point increase in overall satisfaction in this area. It is typically anchored on the lower end of city service satisfaction, and it's moving upwards and by a significant amount this year to 84%. Pathways are up 4% to 96. Bylaw, which saw that decrease in perceived importance, is up 4 points in satisfaction. So fewer people saying it's important, more people saying they're satisfied with it. And the same thing with animal control services. More people satisfied with animal control this year than what we saw in 2013. And finally, community services up 2 points to 92%. On to the ever interesting topic of taxation. So we have been tracking perceptions around perceived value for property taxes since 2005. And part of this question includes some education to respondents on the phone that half of their municipal property tax dollars are allocated to the province and half come to the municipal government. Not many people know that that is actually the case, but we contextualize it as part of this question. When we take a look at the perceived value in terms of being good, so this is rated on a 7-point scale, so we're looking at numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10 combined. We have 2/3 of Calgarians rating their overall value for property tax dollars as being good or very good, which has been trending up since 2010. We're 14 points higher than we were back at that point. In terms of neutral values, again, pretty steady over the last number of years, and about 1 in 10 saying that they receive poor value for their property tax dollars. All of these numbers, when we take a look at them in comparison to other Canadian municipalities, are higher than what we typically see across the country. Finally, in the area of taxation, we do ask a question around an appetite for increasing taxes versus cutting services. And you can see from the slide, we have 6 in 10 Calgarians who say that they support some type of a tax increase, whether that's to either expand services or keep them at their current levels. We have about 1/3 that say to cut services, and that's either to maintain the tax rate at the current level or to reduce taxes. Again, when we look at these numbers across Canada, the appetite for increasing taxes is notably higher in Calgary than it is in other parts of the country, which aligns with the issue agenda. We have this year a bump in terms of the infrastructure ask from citizens, and they're telling us through this survey that they're willing to see some type of an increase to support that. And so when we take a look at trending over the last number of years, I'm just going to build this chart, you can see the green bar relates to increasing to expand services, basically the same as what we saw last year. The only change that we saw versus 2013 is a decrease from 28 to 23% in the percentage of people who say that they would support some type of a cut to maintain their service levels. And new for 2014 is a question related to investment. So for every service that is tested in this survey, we ask Calgarians to tell us whether or not they supported more investment, less investment, or the same investment. These are ranked based on the percentage of Calgarians who support some type of an increase in investment. So you can see 67% of Calgarians support investing more in Calgary transit, 66% in traffic flow management, snow removal, road maintenance, transportation planning. All of the items that are ranked high on that issue agenda, Calgarians are saying in this particular question they support more investment, down to recreation facilities at 41%. When you combine the same and more, we have virtually all citizens in the overall bucket for these services. There's a very small minority of Calgarians who say invest less in the services on this slide. And I'm going to show you 2 more. This slide starts with the fire department, ends with bike lanes. So overall, 40% of Calgarians say invest more in the fire department, down to 28% who support investing more on bike lanes on streets. When we combine the more and the same for most of the services on the slide, again, we're in the 80s and 90s, down to the bike lanes, which still has 61% of Calgarians who invest the same or more investment in that area. And again, for the most part, a minority of people suggesting investing less in all of those services, with the exception of bike lanes, where we see 39% say invest less than today. And finally, last slide, development and building inspections and permits, down to property tax assessment. Again, same story as the previous slides. Strong majority of people supporting some type of a future investment that's either the same or more in each of these categories. Thank you very much. I'm going to welcome His Worship back to the table.
That last bit that Jamie was talking about, I think, is really, really interesting. You know, there have been those who said that our question about taxes and services is leading, or that it's challenging. It isn't, of course, because what we're attempting to do is to help citizens answer a question that we face every day, to actually make tough decisions. We don't ask people if they want a golden toilet, because everyone wants a golden toilet, until you figure out how you're going to pay for it. So to me, that is very interesting, but I'm going to highlight as well the very last things that Jamie was talking about, which are the questions around service by service. What do people see? What do people want? And consistently across services, you see that people want us to spend the same or more. You know, it's coincidental that the citizen satisfaction survey results, which are always released around this time of year, are being released just before we get into our budget discussions, but certainly we are guided by data in those discussions. So just to summarize for you all then, 87% of Calgarians are satisfied with their quality of life. 86% of Calgarians rate the quality of service they receive from the City of Calgary as consistently high. 89% say we're on track to becoming a better city. 79% are satisfied with city programs and services. 84% agree the city is open and accessible. 91% are satisfied with the natural environment. 86% are satisfied to live in their neighborhood or proud to live in their neighborhood. 84% satisfied with land use planning. 81% satisfied with roads and infrastructure. 84% perceiving the city as safe. 80% satisfied with Calgary Transit. 96% satisfied with the quality of the drinking water. These are big numbers, and they are absolutely numbers that show that people are happy to live here, that they're proud to be Calgarians, that they believe the city is on the right track and continues to be on the right track, and that they are satisfied with the quality of services provided by my colleagues at the City of Calgary. So this is a good report card. It's a very good report card. It doesn't mean that we don't have things we need to improve, but it certainly is a good place for us. Now, just for fun, because you know I love data and I'm driven by data, I thought I would share with you some data on one particular topic. Over the course of the last year, we have had many, many, many gallons of ink spilt and many, 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 many volumes of hot air extruded by politicians and others on the issue of cycle tracks. And I thought it would be fun to pull together all of the data on cycle tracks. A giant wedge issue, an issue that people are fighting about in the streets, that this is a major, major concern and people are so opposed to the minor changes that the City of Calgary is trying to make. Only 1% of Calgarians will ever use the bike tracks, we hear. Well, how important are they? 57% of Calgarians say it's important to have them. 63% are happy with the city's direction on them. 61% want to invest more or the same amount of money in them. After all that work to try and create a wedge issue, we didn't get much of a wedge, did we? And when you think about the fact that this particular issue is the one that ranks the least, it's a small issue, but it's the one that ranks the least among city services that we talk about, and the numbers are still this high, that fundamentally tells you that we probably need to look somewhere else if we're trying to create these wedges. Anyway, that was just for fun. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. I'm happy to answer them, as is Jamie. It's a little late, actually, because ideally, it would be great to have this information as we're preparing the draft budgets. And of course, we did use these data from last year, excuse me, in the creation of council's priorities earlier in the year, as well as you know, we do an enormous amount of specific engagement on the budget. And we've had about, last I checked, about 24,000 Calgarians, so 10 times this survey, engaged specifically on questions around the budget. But it's very, very important for us to have citizen information as we make these decisions. Well, I'm not sure how much it will be. Certainly my council colleagues have this information as well. It was released to them today as well. In my mind, what it says is, as you know, every year at budget time, I spend a bunch of time with the big binders looking for savings. And what this indicates, and I'm still at it, I'm a little behind where I normally am at this time of year. But what this indicates to me is that there's a real desire, as we look at Jamie's final slides, there's a real desire for savings that we find to be reinvested, and look at the number one. It's Calgary Transit. So to me, I can't speak for my council colleagues, but for me, if we're finding savings in this budget, then the first place I'm looking in where to put those is in Calgary Transit, followed quickly by traffic flow management. But it's only 40%. After all that convincing people that cycle tracks are the work of the devil, you only get to 40%, when we generally know that if you ask people about anything that's contentious, you get 1/3. That's my point.
You get to 72% that say, stop worrying.
Well, good. Well, the good news is we're not spending any more. We want to spend the same, so awesome.
So
We're there anyway.
There won't be any more cycle tracks after this pilot project.
Well, no, it's a...
Because only 28%
You know what I love? I love that I pointed this out to make a point that you're all focusing on the least important thing, and two of the first three questions, and two out of the three questions are focused on the least important thing in the survey. You know, that's... It's a really good question. That's a very good question, and we get into the detail on this, really in our budget engagement process. And when we do the budget engagement process, it's pretty clear that people are saying, look, I understand that growth causes inflationary pressures, and that straight up inflation causes inflationary pressures. So when you say to people, you know, should the taxes increase by the rate of growth plus inflation, you get a very broad consensus that people say, yeah, that makes sense. The argument that we can have is, well, how do you define inflation? You know, is it wage inflation? Is it price inflation? Is it cost inflation? How does that change over time? And those are really the debates that we end up having during the whole budget engagement process. But, You know, what this is intended to do, this is not a survey. We always have to remember that we always focus on the tax question, but this is not a survey primarily about that. You know, this is 2 or 3 questions out of a 29-minute interview, and it's really about helping us determine whether we're delivering services people want in a way that they're satisfied with. I know we always focus in on that, and this I'm not making fun of you about. I'm suggesting that we do it too. You know, at council and senior management always want to know the answer to that question, even before we want to know are people happy or not. So it gives us some directional information, but it's not all we do. And the engagement we do around the budget is really designed, and again, we've had about 10 times as many people participate in that as this, is really designed to get to that finer grain. Well, you know, it's also an excellent question. When I look back over the time that I've been mayor, we have focused on service improvements really only in 2 major areas. There's been a couple of minor ones here and there, but really we focused on service improvements only in transit and in snow clearing. And clearly those are very, very high on the agenda. And what you have in, what council has in front of it going forward is it's not quite fair to characterize it as a hold the line, because there are service improvements here and there throughout it. But the majority of what's in there is really about holding the line. And so council members will have to think about, is this really what we want to do? And I'll give you one preview of an interesting debate that we will have probably later in the week next week, and it's about snow clearing. So when we released the budget documents yesterday, you will have seen at the very back of that there's a package of potential quite a large increase in snow clearing. But the large increase isn't just throw more money at it. It's actually fundamentally change the level of service that we provide. And so that's, I think, a really healthy debate for council to have, to say, are we willing to improve the service, and this is how much it'll cost? So do we think that citizens want us to make our 7-day plan a 4-day plan, for example, at a cost of X million dollars per year? And I think that's a good thing for us to have these data in front of us in order to make those decisions. You know, it's interesting because the survey was done over how long, Jamie? How many days? Over a 5-week period, but the 5-week period included the snow events in September. So the survey was actually happening during that event. But we haven't actually seen the kinds of changes I might have expected to see over the last couple of years, given the number of events we've had. In fact, one of the really interesting, as you know, I love data and I can go on forever about interesting data, but the one that I find fascinating is, I think it's on the previous page, protection from river flooding, where you actually see 8% of people saying spend less on that. It's not what I would have expected. Certainly you have 92% of people saying spend the same or more. But clearly, even that issue is fading a little bit from some people's minds, and we've got to keep that at the top of what we do, because we have to realize that those are tough decisions, you know? We could build a tunnel, for example, a diversion tunnel for water that, if we're lucky, will never ever be used. And so it's difficult for both citizens and policymakers to say, look, let's spend hundreds of millions of dollars on something that we're hoping will never be used. And so making those decisions is tough. But I don't think that we've seen, when we look year over year, real changes in people's priorities based simply on emergencies. I think they're satisfied with the way we handle these emergencies. I'm not very good at sound bites today, I apologize. This is an excellent question, and I want to talk specifically about snow removal. Actually, I'll talk about both of them. On snow removal, the question that we need to address with the citizens is, do you actually want a higher level of service, or do you want the existing promises on level of services to be kept more often? So the challenge that we had in December until we fixed it in January was that we have a 7-day snow removal plan. So over the last 2 weeks, this worked exactly the way it was supposed to work, which is when the snowfall ended, we worked through the priority 1 and priority 2 roads and then got to the 3s and 4s as needed. But of course, last year we never had, for an incredibly long period of time, we never had 7 days without another snowfall. And so we were forever behind. And on those priority 3 and 4 streets, snow was piling up, and we weren't able to keep our promise. And so we changed things and use more private contractors so that we could keep those private contractors working on the 3s and 4s while our crews would work on the 1s and 2s, so that we could keep that promise. And so the question that council is going to be facing sometime next week is, are we satisfied that we can now keep our promise using the changes that we've made for this year? If not, we may have to find more money. But the second question is, do we have to make a better promise? Is 7 days too long? Should we be able to move to something quicker and better? Should we have every cul-de-sac in the city done in 4 days? I don't know what council is going to say about that. My sense, you want to know what I'm going to say about it? Is if I have more than one vote, I don't participate in the debate, as you know, ever. That was a joke. So I don't know. I actually don't. My sense from what I'm hearing from citizens is they want to make sure we can do what we promised to do, that there's not a huge clamoring for faster service on the residential roads, which is really what we're talking about. But I'm gonna have that debate with council and see what they have to say. Similarly with transit. So the issue on transit is that I actually discovered something this week, which is I think that we're using a misleading metric. When we look at the metric of transit hours per capita in a place that is experiencing such extraordinary growth, you're always going to be behind. You're never going to be able to get to that number because the denominator is changing. And every single bus isn't full 24 hours a day. So the mechanism of transit hours per capita may actually be the wrong measure. It's a measure that transit agencies across North America use, but it may not be the right measure. We might want to look at pure transit hours or transit hours at given times or the availability of transit on popular routes at any given time. So I want to be very thoughtful about how we invest there, that we're not just going slavishly after a particular metric.
We have to wrap things up.
It won't have much impact on the city's operating budget. While the property tax, as I've said many times, is an unfair form of taxation, the very thing that makes it unfair is the thing that insulates us from this problem, because it's relatively stable over time. And so it shouldn't have really much, if any, impact on the operating budget unless you start to see a mass exodus from Calgary and property values declining. But since we did not see that in 2008, I don't anticipate we're going to see that this time. And we just had Suncor announce that they're keeping up their capital spend, and the capital spend is actually what drives the employment and the investments. So I'm not seeing much of a change on the operating side. We'll have to see what happens on the capital side, on the when we build things side, because certainly the last regime at the provincial level really did try to protect the city's infrastructure funding, because we spent it all already. You know, it was spent on the West LRT and on other projects. We're just paying off the debt now with those grants. And if those grants get delayed, that's going to be a very significant cost to the city in interest payments that we need to be very careful about. I think it will impact both provincially and federally the availability of future capital funds. So the federal government, for example, last year with much fanfare announced the Build Canada Fund, but there's no money in it. There's very little money in it, about $900 million to be spread across the country per year. And when you take out the stuff for small communities and stuff, so spread across the big cities. And the thought always was that they've set up the mechanism for significant infrastructure funding from the federal government, but they just haven't funded it yet. They primed the pump, but they haven't started pumping. And the idea always was, when they went into surplus, that those numbers would go up significantly. And we heard from the federal government in their fall economic update last week that the price of oil declining has actually had a pretty significant impact on their forecasts. So I am guessing that we will likely see less growth in those infrastructure funding programs than we expected, which means that the capital funding that you see in this budget, 3 new interchanges and so on, is not likely to grow. So, at council this week, we approved the functional design for, or did we send it back? We sent it back, actually. We almost approved the functional design for 16th Avenue, 19th Street, Barlow, Deerfoot, which is an unfunded program. But we did the design in the anticipation that in the next 4 or 5 years we would get the funding for it. So projects like that, I think, are becoming a little bit less likely. A bit of both. Certainly, we are not responding to the desire for increased investment as much as some would like us to. But we are really trying to focus what we're doing on those areas where citizens have told us this is a priority area for us. So when it first came out, the messaging around the draft budget was really, you know, you're paying more, but you're not going to get much. But as I said on that day at this podium, you know, we are building new interchanges. We are investing in 7 new busways across the city. And so to me, I think people will be happy with the level of service that they're getting for what they're paying. The other thing that a certain columnist hates when I say, but I'm going to say it anyway, our taxes remain the lowest of any major city in the country, even after these increases. We anticipate they will continue to stay that way. But people are getting an extraordinarily high quality of service out of it, as we learned today. And so that's the challenge. I got a tough job. My colleagues on council have a tough job, because we have to be able to balance off people's desire for service with maintaining affordability for everyone in the community. And the budget attempts to strike that balance. Certainly we will debate that next week, but I think that that is always our goal.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.